The traders who blow up their accounts aren't the ones who take too much risk. They're the ones who think they're not taking any risk at all. They've convinced themselves their analysis is so good, their edge so clear, that this trade is basically guaranteed. And that delusion, that certainty in an uncertain game, is what destroys them. Because the moment you believe you've eliminated risk, you stop managing it, you size up, you skip your stop, you override your rules, and the market, which never promised you anything, does what it always does, whatever it wants. The fortunes that get built, they're built by people who are paranoid about risk even when everything looks perfect. The fortunes that get destroyed, they're destroyed by confidence. You've been taught that risk management is about math, position sizing formulas, stop-loss percentages, risk-reward ratios, and yes, those matter. But they're not why traders blow up. Traders blow up because they don't follow the math when it conflicts with what they want to believe. They blow up because they've never built a psychological framework for accepting loss. They blow up because they think risk management is a technical problem when it's actually an identity problem. Here's the brutal truth. You can have the perfect risk management system and still destroy yourself if you don't understand the psychological rules that govern how humans actually relate to uncertainty and loss. The core pain we're addressing is this. You know what you're supposed to do. Small position sizes, defined risk, strict rules. But you keep breaking your own rules in the moment. You override your stops, you size up when emotional, you hold losers too long and cut winners too short, and you hate yourself for it because you know better. But knowing better doesn't help when your nervous system is screaming at you to do something, anything, to make the pain stop. What makes this different is the 5 rules I'm sharing aren't about calculation. They're about psychology. They're about why you break the math rules you already know, and how to build a relationship with risk that doesn't require white-knuckling your way through every trade. We're addressing the invisible layer beneath the spreadsheets, the beliefs, emotions, and identity patterns that determine whether you'll actually execute your plan or sabotage it. The myth we're busting is that risk management is about minimizing loss. It's not. It's about making loss psychologically survivable so you can stay in the game long enough for your edge to express itself. The fortunes that get built understand this. The fortunes that get broken never learned it. The reframe is, you don't need more discipline. You need better rules designed for how your brain actually works under pressure, not how you wish it worked. I consulted with a trader, we'll call him Marcus, who had a fascinating problem. He was profitable. 62% win rate, solid edge, good risk reward. But he couldn't grow his account. Every time he'd build it up 15-20%, he'd give it all back in a single week. And when we dug into his trade logs, the pattern was obvious. Marcus could take small losses, 2%, 3%, no problem. He'd exit clean, move on to the next trade. But the moment a trade went beyond a certain threshold, let's say 5%, something switched in his psychology. He couldn't take the loss. He'd move his stop, tell himself it was just volatility, it'll come back. And he'd hold that loser until it became a 12, 15, sometimes 20% loss. When I asked him why, he said something I'll never forget. Because if I take a 5% loss, it means I was really wrong. A 2% loss is just noise, but 5%? That means I misread the entire setup, and I can't handle being that wrong. Do you see what happened? Marcus wasn't managing trade risk. He was managing ego risk. A small loss he could explain away. A big loss required admitting he fundamentally misunderstood the market. And his identity as the guy who knows what he's doing couldn't tolerate that. So he'd rather let the loss compound than face the psychological discomfort of being significantly wrong. And it destroyed him, not the market. His relationship with being wrong. We spent 3 months reconditioning his response to invalidation, teaching him that a 5% loss and a 2% loss mean exactly the same thing. The setup didn't work. That's it. No ego implications, just data. And once he internalized that, He stopped moving his stops. Losses stayed small. Accounts started growing consistently. The rule he learned is, define your risk by your rule, not by your emotional tolerance for being wrong. Because if you let your ego determine your exits, you're not managing risk. You're managing self-image. And that's a game you can't win. Imagine you walk into a casino with $1,000 and you decide to play blackjack. You sit down and the dealer asks, "How much per hand?" Now, if you bet $100 per hand, you might get lucky and win a few in a row. You might even double your money. But the math says you're one bad streak away from being broke. 10 losing hands, which is entirely possible, and you're done. You don't even get to play long enough to see if your strategy works. But if you bet $20 per hand, you can lose 25 hands in a row before you're broke. Now, are you going to lose 25 hands in a row? Probably not. But the point is you've given yourself room to survive variance. You've acknowledged that losing is part of the game, and you've structured your risk so that normal variance can't kill you. Trading is identical. Your edge might win 60% of the time. That means 4 out of 10 trades will lose. But those losses don't come evenly distributed. You might lose 5 in a row. If you're risking 10% per trade, 5 losses in a row means you're down 40%. And now you need a 67% return just to get back to break even. You've put yourself in a hole that's mathematically difficult to escape. But if you're risking 1% per trade, 5 losses in a row is a 5% drawdown. Manageable. Psychologically survivable. You're still in the game. The casinos understand this. That's why they have table limits. They're not afraid of you winning. They're afraid of you getting so lucky with massive bets that you break their bankroll before the math can work in their favor. They protect their ability to stay in the game long term. You need to do the same. The rule is size your risk so that a likely losing streak can't end your ability to trade. Not a possible losing streak, a likely one. Because it will happen. The only question is whether you'll survive it. So those are the stories that illustrate the problem. But what are the actual rules? What's the framework that separates the traders who build fortunes from the ones who destroy them? Let's break it down. Here's the first rule, and it's non-negotiable. You must define your risk before you enter the trade, not approximately, exactly. This trade will lose X dollars if I'm wrong, and you have to define wrong in advance. Is wrong when price hits this level, when the time-based stop triggers, when the pattern invalidates? You decide before your money is on the line, because here's what happens if you don't. You enter a trade. It goes against you. Now you're feeling emotional. The trade is underwater. You're uncomfortable. And in that moment, you have to decide, do I exit? Your brain is flooded with cortisol. You're rationalizing. It might come back. It's just a shakeout. If I exit now, I'll feel stupid if it reverses. You cannot make good risk decisions in that state. You just can't. Your prefrontal cortex, the part that thinks rationally, has been hijacked by your amygdala, the part that's trying to avoid pain. And the amygdala doesn't care about your long-term account growth. It cares about making the discomfort stop right now. So the only way to manage risk is to remove the decision from the emotional moment. You decide when you're calm, rational, and not in the trade. And then when emotion arrives, you don't decide. You execute. The decision was already made. You're just following through. This is why I'm so strict about written trading plans. Not because I love paperwork. Because if the rule isn't written down before the trade, it doesn't exist. In the moment, you'll rewrite it to match what you want to be true. But if it's written, if it's clear, if it's pre-committed, you have something to anchor to when your emotions are screaming at you to do something else. Think about pilots. They have checklists for everything, not because they don't know how to fly, because when something goes wrong and adrenaline is pumping, the human brain doesn't think clearly. It panics. It forgets steps. It makes mistakes. The checklist removes the cognitive load. You don't have to think. You just follow the list. Your trading plan is your checklist, and the most important item on that list is exactly what you'll lose if you're wrong. The second rule is about calibration. Your risk per trade needs to be small enough that losing doesn't trigger an emotional response. Not just small in theory, small in your actual nervous system. If you risk 2% per trade and losing that 2% makes you angry, anxious, or desperate to make it back, that's too much, even if the math says you can survive it. Because emotional trading is how you blow up. One loss triggers revenge trading. You size up the next trade to make it back faster. That one loses too. Now you're tilted. You abandon your rules. You start chasing. And 3 trades later, you're down 10% and emotionally destroyed. The right risk per trade is the amount where you can take a loss, feel disappointed for maybe 30 seconds, and then move on to the next trade without it affecting your psychology. For some people, that's 0.5%. For others, it might be 2%. It depends on your account size, your personality, your life circumstances. But here's the test. If losing this trade would affect your mood for the rest of the day, you're risking too much. If you'd feel the need to tell your spouse about it, you're risking too much. If you'd lie awake thinking about it, you're risking too much. The risk needs to be boring, almost forgettable. Because that's the only way you'll trade like a probability manager instead of a gambler protecting their ego. I know this sounds conservative. I know you're thinking, but if I only risk 0.5%, it'll take forever to grow my account. And you're right, it will take longer. But here's the alternative. You risk 3% because you want to grow faster. You hit a losing streak, you get emotional, you start breaking rules, and you blow up. Now you're at 0, and it doesn't matter how fast you were trying to grow because you're not in the game anymore. The paradox of trading is that trying to grow too fast is what prevents you from growing at all. The traders who actually build wealth are the ones who are okay with boring, steady, emotionally insignificant growth. Because that's the only kind that compounds. Emotional volatility in your risk management creates equity curve volatility. And equity curve volatility creates psychological volatility. And psychological volatility is what kills accounts. The third rule addresses the fundamental delusion that destroys traders. You cannot eliminate risk. You can only manage it. And management means accepting that uncertainty is permanent. Too many traders approach risk like it's a problem to be solved. If I just analyze enough, if I just find the perfect entry, if I just wait for the absolute highest probability setup, I can trade without risk. That's fantasy. Every trade has risk. The market can do anything at any time for any reason. Your job isn't to find trades without risk. It's to take trades where the risk is defined, limited, and acceptable. This is a psychological shift. You're not trying to be right. You're trying to participate in opportunities where the potential reward justifies the potential risk, and the probability is in your favor over many repetitions. Any single trade can lose for reasons that have nothing to do with your analysis. Flash crash, news event, whale dumping, acts of God. The traders who build fortunes accept this. They know they're going to be wrong frequently. They know that perfect analysis still results in losses. And they're okay with it because they've structured their risk so that being wrong is survivable and being right is profitable enough to compensate for all the times they're wrong. The traders who break fight this. They keep searching for certainty. They keep trying to eliminate uncertainty through more analysis, more indicators, more complexity. And when they lose anyway because they will, they're psychologically devastated because the loss violates their worldview. They believed they'd eliminated risk. So when risk shows up anyway, their entire framework collapses. I'll tell you what this looks like in practice. I've seen traders who refuse to take a trade unless they're 95% sure it'll work. Sounds reasonable, right? The problem is 95% certainty doesn't exist in trading. So what actually happens is they convince themselves they're 95% sure when they're really maybe 60% sure, and they lie to themselves to justify taking the trade. Then, when it loses, they're not just dealing with the financial loss. They're dealing with the cognitive dissonance of, I was so sure, how could I be wrong? That cognitive dissonance is more painful than the money. And it leads to either analysis paralysis, where they can't take the next trade because they don't trust their certainty anymore, or revenge trading, where they take the next trade with even more false certainty to prove they're not broken. Both paths lead to destruction. The healthier approach is to enter every trade thinking, I have an edge here, the probability is in my favor, and I have no idea what will happen on this specific trade. That's honest. That's accurate. And it's psychologically sustainable because when the trade loses, you're not surprised. You expected that uncertainty could resolve against you. You managed for it. You survive it. You move on. Rule 4 is about worst-case planning. Before you take any trade, you need to ask yourself, if this goes as badly as it possibly could within my risk parameters, can I handle it? Not financially, we already covered position sizing. Psychologically, can you handle it emotionally and continue trading? Because here's what happens. You set a stop loss. You think you're protected. But the market gaps through your stop and you get filled 30% worse than you planned. Or you're trading a lower liquidity asset and the slippage is massive. Or your platform glitches and you can't exit. These things happen. Rare, but real. If that worst-case scenario would devastate you, you're not properly managing risk. You're just hoping it won't happen. And hope isn't a strategy. You need to stress test your risk. What if I lose 3 times my planned risk on this trade due to circumstances outside my control? Could I psychologically recover and take the next trade? If the answer is no, you need to reduce your position size until the answer is yes. This also applies to losing streaks. What if you lose 10 trades in a row? Mathematically possible with any edge. If that would make you question everything and quit, you haven't accepted the reality of probabilistic outcomes. You're still attached to short-term validation. The rule is, plan for the worst, hope for the best, but only take the trade if the worst wouldn't break you. I remember a trader who came to me after a catastrophic loss. He was trading earnings announcements, had a stop-loss set. The company announced bankruptcy unexpectedly. Stock gapped down 70% at the open. His stop was meaningless. He lost his entire position, which was 10% of his account, in a single trade. And it broke him psychologically, not just because of the money, because he thought he was protected. He thought his stop made him safe. And when he learned that stops don't guarantee anything, his entire sense of control evaporated. We had to rebuild his psychology from the ground up, teach him that control is an illusion. You can't control the market. You can only control your exposure. And exposure means acknowledging that even your protective measures can fail. Once he accepted that, once he started sizing positions so that even a complete wipeout of that position wouldn't end him, he started trading with a completely different energy, calmer, more detached. Because he'd already made peace with the worst possible outcome, and when you've made peace with the worst, everything else is just variance. The final rule is the meta rule. Risk management isn't about maximizing profit. It's about ensuring you survive long enough to allow your edge to express itself over a large sample size. This is the hardest one for ambitious traders to accept because it feels passive. It feels like you're playing not to lose instead of playing to win. But here's the paradox. The only way to win the long game is to make sure you can't lose the short game catastrophically. The traders who blow up are optimizing for maximum profit per trade. They're thinking, how much can I make? The traders who build fortunes are optimizing for survivability. They're thinking, how do I make sure I'm still here in 5 years? Because if you're still trading in 5 years and you have an edge, you'll be profitable. The math guarantees it. But if you blow up in year 2 chasing outsized returns, none of your edge matters. You're gone. This is why the best traders risk less than they could mathematically afford. They're not maximizing expected value per trade. They're maximizing the probability they'll survive all possible futures. And that conservative approach, counterintuitively, is what allows them to be aggressive long-term. Because they're never one bad streak away from extinction, they can trade through any market condition without fear. And that fearlessness is the ultimate edge. Think about Warren Buffett. People focus on his returns, but his real genius is that he's never blown up. He's been investing for 70 years. 70 years. through crashes, recessions, bubbles, wars, everything, and he's still here. That's not luck. That's survival first thinking. He doesn't try to maximize every opportunity. He tries to never put himself in a position where one mistake ends him. And because he's survived everything, he's compounded wealth longer than almost anyone in history. You need to think the same way. Your edge isn't how much you make when you're right. Your edge is that you'll still be trading when everyone else has blown up. And you'll still be trading because you managed risk for survival, not for glory. So you understand the 5 rules. But how do you actually implement them? How do you rewire your psychology so you follow these rules even when everything in you wants to break them? Let's get practical. Before any trade, write down these sentences and fill in the blanks. I am risking this exact dollar amount on this trade. I am wrong if this specific price level or condition hits. If I am wrong, I will exit immediately and accept this loss without analysis, justification, or emotion. I have defined this risk when calm and rational, and I commit to honoring it regardless of what I feel in the moment. Sign it. Time-stamp it. This is your contract with future you, the you that will be emotional and looking for excuses. This might sound excessive. It's not. It's the difference between having a plan and executing a plan. When you're in the trade and it's going against you, your brain will offer you 1,000 reasons to override your stop. Just a little more room. It's about to turn. This is just a shakeout. Having that written contract creates friction. It forces you to consciously violate a written commitment, and that psychological barrier is often enough to keep you honest. Take your account size. Multiply by 1%. That's your baseline risk per trade. Now ask yourself honestly, could I lose this amount 10 times in a row and still show up tomorrow mentally intact? If yes, that's your number. If no, cut it in half and ask again. Keep cutting until the answer is yes. Your survival number might be smaller than you want. That's fine. Better to grow slowly than to blow up trying to grow fast. And here's what most people get wrong. They calculate the 1%, think that sounds reasonable, and never actually test it emotionally. You need to viscerally imagine losing that amount, not once, 10 times consecutively. Feel what that would be like. Would you start questioning your entire approach? Would you get desperate? Would you want to quit? If any of those are true, your risk is too high. You need a number where 10 consecutive losses would be disappointing but not devastating. Where you'd think, well, that was a rough streak, but the math says this happens, let me keep executing, and it'll even out. That's the right calibration. Once a week, visualize your worst-case scenario, your biggest position, gaps against you. You lose triple what you planned. How do you feel? What do you do next? Walk yourself through the emotional experience and your response. This is psychological stress testing. You're teaching your nervous system that even the worst-case scenario is survivable and has a plan. When it actually happens, and eventually something will, you won't freeze. You'll execute the plan you've already rehearsed. This is borrowed from cognitive behavioral therapy. It's called exposure therapy. You expose yourself to the thing you fear in a controlled environment so that when you encounter it in reality, it doesn't overwhelm you. Traders who've never mentally rehearsed their disaster scenario panic when it happens. They freeze, they make emotional decisions, they compound the damage. Traders who visualized it stay calm. They've already been here in their mind. They know what to do. You will be tempted to break your rules. That's guaranteed. So build a circuit breaker. A rule that says if I want to override my plan, I must first close the platform, step away for 15 minutes, and write down my justification. If after 15 minutes and writing it out, I still believe the override is correct, I can do it, but I must document it and review it later. This pause disrupts the emotional hijacking. 90% of the time, the urge to override will pass. The 15 minutes is key. That's about how long it takes for your amygdala to calm down and your prefrontal cortex to come back online. In the heat of the moment, the urge to override feels urgent, compelling, obvious. But if you force yourself to wait, to step away from the screen, to articulate your reasoning in writing, that urgency dissipates. You start to see the rationalization for what it is. And most of the time you'll realize the override was emotional, not strategic. And if you do override, if after 15 minutes you still think it's the right call, documenting it is crucial. Because later, when the emotion is gone completely, you can review that decision with clear eyes. Was it actually a good call, or were you still compromised? Over time, this creates a feedback loop. You start to see patterns in when and why you break rules. And that self-awareness is what allows you to address the root cause instead of just fighting the symptom. After every trading day, journal one thing. Did I follow my risk rules perfectly? Yes or no? Not, did I make money? Just did I honor my predefined risk? A day where you lost money but followed your rules is a perfect day. A day where you made money but violated your rules is a failure. You're reconditioning your reward system. The dopamine hit comes from discipline, not profit. Because discipline is what creates profit long term. This is hard. Your brain wants to celebrate the winning trade, even if you broke every rule to get it. And your brain wants to beat you up over the losing trade, even if you executed perfectly. But if you let outcome determine your self-evaluation, you'll never develop consistent discipline. You'll keep reinforcing the idea that results matter more than process. And that belief is what destroys traders. You have to be ruthless about this. If you risked 3% when your rule was 2%, even if the trade won, you failed that day. Mark it as a failure. Feel the sting of that. Because the win was luck, and luck doesn't compound. The next time you break that rule, you might not get lucky. And if you've trained your brain that breaking rules is okay when it works, you'll keep breaking them until it doesn't work, and you blow up. Conversely, if you executed perfectly, followed every rule, and the trade still lost, celebrate that. You did your job. The market did its job. Those jobs aren't the same. Your job is process. The market's job is outcome. And you can only control your job. So here's where we've been. You came here thinking risk management was about formulas and percentages. And yes, those matter. But what we've uncovered is that the real battle isn't mathematical. It's psychological. The 5 rules: define risk before emotion, keep risk emotionally insignificant, accept uncertainty rather than eliminate it, ensure worst-case scenarios are survivable, and prioritize staying in the game over winning any individual trade. These aren't technical rules, they're identity rules. We talked about Marcus, who couldn't take a loss because it meant admitting he was wrong, and how that ego protection destroyed his account. We explored the casino principle, that survival is about structuring your risk so normal variance can't kill you. And we broke down why the fortunes that get built aren't built by the most aggressive traders, but by the most survivable ones. The practices, the pre-trade contracts, the disaster simulations, the override protocols, they all point to one truth. You can't control the market, but you can control your relationship with uncertainty. And that relationship is what determines whether you build wealth or destroy it. Here's your mantra. Say it before every trade. I cannot control outcome. I can only control risk. I accept uncertainty. I honor my plan. I am here to survive first, profit second, and survival is how I win long term. Listen, you're going to be tempted to break these rules. You're going to see a setup that feels so good you want to size up. You're going to hit a losing streak and want to make it back fast. You're going to feel the pull of ego, revenge, fear, and greed. That's not failure, that's being human. But the difference between traders who make it and traders who don't is what you do with that impulse. Do you indulge it, or do you recognize it, honor it as information about your state, and execute your plan anyway? If this resonated with you, if you felt something click, if you recognized yourself in these patterns, if you're ready to build a relationship with risk that actually works, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Drop a comment and tell me which of the 5 rules you struggle with most. And subscribe, because we're going deeper. You've got this. Not because you'll never feel the urge to break your rules, but because you're finally ready to build rules designed for how you actually work, not how you wish you worked. I'll see you in the next one.